The winter sun hung over the remote Siberian village like a cold knife. For years, the old woman had lived there alone. Her house stood at the edge of the forest, surrounded by creaking trees and a silence broken only by the crunch of her footsteps in the snow. She had no television, no phone, just a kerosene lamp and an old radio that crackled more than it spoke. But her hands were skilled, her gaze sharp, and her heart lonely. Each day resembled the last. Until one morning, something lay at her door that would change everything. A woven basket, half covered with a wool cloth. Inside, a small, trembling creature with intelligent, dark eyes. It looked up at her, not with fear, but with a silent kind of plea. The old woman slowly bent down, her joints cracking as she lifted the bundle. "A puppy?" she murmured. No one had knocked. No one had called out. And yet she knew instantly, this creature was not here by accident. She pressed it to her chest and it whimpered softly. In that moment, a decision was made, not in her mind, but in her heart. She named him Misha. The little one was delicate but alert, ate with appetite, and slept curled up on her stove bench like a kitten. At first, she thought he was simply a quiet dog. He never barked, rarely whimpered. But his gaze was different, smarter, watchful. Sometimes he sat by the window, staring into the forest, as if he heard something calling him. But he never left. He was always by her side, followed her to the well, guarded the house, slept beside her bed like an old friend. The neighbors, rare as they were, began to whisper. "The old woman's wolf," they murmured, but she only chuckled softly. To her, Misha was a gift. She had lost much in life. A husband to war, a son who never returned. But she had never lost her compassion. And now, Misha was her silent companion, even as she slowly came to realize he wasn't a dog, but a young wolf, a wild heart that had chosen to stay. She could have sent him back into the forest, but how could she cast away someone who had become her light in the darkness? So he stayed. And they continued on, day by day, evening by evening, two forgotten souls living quietly. What she didn't know, that decision would soon mean the difference between life and death. Not just her own, but that of an animal ready to give everything for her. Time passed slowly, in rhythm with the seasons. Snow came, snow went, and with it, the last traces of life in the village disappeared. Most of the houses stood empty now. Only a few elderly souls remained, just like her. The world outside spun faster and faster, but here, between the crackling of the stove and the creaking of wooden floors, everything had remained still. Only Misha gave her days meaning. He woke her each morning with a gentle snort, licked her hand, brought her pieces of firewood, as if he understood what she needed. She often spoke to him, just as she once had with her husband. Tales of old times, of loss, of dreams that had never come true. And Misha listened, in a way humans had long forgotten. When she laughed, he lifted his head. When she cried, he quietly lay by her side. He never barked, but his eyes spoke. In them was something humanity had long lost, unconditional loyalty. Sometimes she walked with him deep into the forest, farther than she ever had before. She wasn't afraid. With Misha, she felt safer than she ever had with a human. And although he had grown into a large, powerful wolf, there was never a trace of wildness in him. No chickens went missing. No neighbor ever complained. Misha was her guardian, not a prisoner, not a pet, a friend, a silent protector of her soul. But life on the edge of the world is not just quiet, it is forgotten. And in that forgotten corner, things can grow that no one sees. One evening, as she sat by the stove peeling her last potatoes, a brief announcement came on the radio. 3 men had escaped from prison, armed and dangerous. They were believed to be hiding in the surrounding forests. The old woman turned to Misha. The wolf sat frozen, staring into the darkness. Something had shifted. In the days that followed, she felt it. Misha grew restless. He sniffed at the windows more often, let out low, deep growls when branches snapped outside. She tried to soothe him. "There's nothing out there, my boy," she whispered. But deep down, she knew. Misha sensed something she could not see, something that was drawing closer, something that would soon tear their quiet world apart. That evening was unusually quiet. Even the wind, which usually howled through the shutters, had fallen silent. The old woman sat beneath the glow of the kerosene lamp, a blanket over her shoulders, Misha resting at her feet. Nothing played on the radio anymore, just a soft static hum. Outside it was pitch black, a thick layer of fog settling over the snow. Then suddenly, a knock at the door. Misha's head jerked up, the fur along his neck bristled. A deep, guttural growl vibrated in his chest. She startled, stood up, and opened the door just a crack. And in the next second, everything went black. A harsh blow to the head sent her crashing to the floor. 3 men stormed into the house, rough, heavy breathing, eyes wild with panic. They shut the door behind them and looked around, searching for food, money, warmth. What they didn't expect was the blinding glow of 2 golden yellow eyes glaring at them from the dim light of the room. Misha now stood between them and the unconscious woman. No movement was rushed, no sound wasted. He growled low, muscles taut like a predator moments before it strikes. One of the men drew a gun, but at that instant, the wolf lunged. A scream, a thud, blood spattered. The armed man collapsed. Panic erupted. The other 2 fled the house, stumbling into the night, toward the forest. But Misha didn't chase them. He turned back to her, nudged her, licked her face. The 3rd man, the one with the gun, staggered out the door, gathered himself and raised the weapon, trembling. A shot tore through the night. Misha yelped, collapsed, hit in the hind leg. And yet, even then, he didn't look away. He growled, dragged himself forward, and stood protectively over her body. At that moment, the neighbors arrived. They had heard the screams, the gunfire, the animals cry. One had called the police. The men were caught. The old woman was taken to the hospital. When she awoke in the hospital bed, her face swollen, her head bandaged, she didn't ask about the intruders. Her first words were, "Where is Misha?" And when they told her he was alive, that a veterinarian from the next town had been brought in, she cried. Tears she hadn't shed since the death of her son. Not tears of pain, but of gratitude. Misha had done what no human ever had. He had protected her with everything he had. Misha lay still on the blanket in the small veterinary clinic, his body exhausted, his gaze dull, but he was alive. The bullet had pierced his leg, but not his heart. The veterinarian, an older woman with calm, steady hands, said, "He fought like a warrior." And that's what he was. Not a pet, not a wolf. Something in between, something purer. When the old woman was allowed to see him again, she fell to her knees. Her fingers trembled as they touched his fur. Tears fell onto his forehead. He lifted his head. Their eyes met. No sound. Only connection. Weeks passed. Misha healed slowly, and the woman recovered too, at least on the outside. But something had changed. Her world was no longer silent. People began to visit, bringing gifts, covering her with words of respect. Reporters wanted to speak to her, but she declined. This story belonged only to her and Misha, to no one else. She walked alone to the well again, alone through the woods. But now, she never forgot to bring a stick. Not out of fear, but out of gratitude. Misha was once again by her side, but he had become more vigilant. He no longer allowed strangers near the house. If someone approached, he would lie in front of the door, his gaze hard, his posture protective. No one could blame him. He had seen what humans were capable of, and he had suffered for her. Yet to the old woman, he was the same as ever. In the evenings, he slept by her bed. In the mornings, he waited for her to rise so they could begin the day together, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. One of those winter evenings, As snow fell outside and the fire crackled inside, she sat with a cup of tea in hand, watching Misha breathe softly beside the stove. She thought back to the day she found him, small, trembling, abandoned. And she realized she hadn't saved him, he had found her. And maybe even back then, he had known that his time would come, not as a dog, not as a wolf, but as the guardian of her final years. And if you ask her today whether she's afraid, living alone on the edge of the forest, she softly says, "No, I have the best guardian there ever was." She looks at Misha then, who stares back at her as if he understands every word. And maybe he does, because some stories need no words. They live in a glance, in a heartbeat, in the quiet loyalty of a creature that once lay in the snow at her door, and in the end, saved her life. Forever. This story showed us that true loyalty needs no words, that sometimes a silent gaze means more than 1,000 promises, and that love, even between human and animal, can be stronger than any fear. What touched you most about Misha's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who believes in miracles. Because sometimes the greatest miracle lies right outside your door in the snow.